Sergeant Ryan had given everything for his country, but in return, he lost his freedom. Wrongly convicted of a crime he didn't commit, he found himself locked away, his life shattered. The one thing that kept him alive in the cold, harsh prison was the memory of his loyal service dog, Max. Max had been his protector, his friend, and the one thing that made him feel whole during the darkest days of his life. Now, with his time running out, Ryan had one last request, a simple wish, to see Max one final time. But the prison system refused, telling him it was impossible. As Ryan's body weakened, his family fought tirelessly to make the impossible happen. The system said no, but fate had other plans. What happened next defied all expectations, and the twist would leave everyone speechless. Stay with us to discover the unbelievable ending. Sergeant Ryan Matthews had always been a dedicated soldier, a man who put his country above all else. Growing up, he'd dreamed of serving in the military, following in the footsteps of his father, who had also been a proud serviceman. From the moment he joined, he excelled in everything: training, combat, and most importantly, his connection with his comrades. But it wasn't just other soldiers who became Ryan's family. It was his service dog Max, a German shepherd with an unshakable bond to Ryan. Max had been by Ryan's side through every mission, every firefight, and every long, lonely night. They were inseparable, their bond forged not just through training, but through life-or-death moments on the battlefield. Max was more than a dog. He was Ryan's rock, the one thing that kept him grounded when everything else seemed to fall apart. Whether it was alerting Ryan to hidden dangers or simply sitting beside him in the stillness of their quarters, Max had been the one constant, offering comfort when the world felt too heavy. But Ryan's world was shattered one fateful day. After returning from a difficult overseas deployment, a chain of events led to a devastating situation. Despite his impeccable service record, Ryan was wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit, an accusation so far-fetched that even his closest comrades couldn't believe it. He was convicted of a crime that was nothing more than a web of lies, manipulated evidence, and a broken justice system. The conviction sent shockwaves through Ryan's life. His career was over and his reputation tarnished. But the most painful loss was the separation from Max. His loyal companion, the dog who had been by his side through everything, was taken away, placed in a kennel with no guarantee of ever seeing Ryan again. In that moment, the world felt like it had crumbled beneath him. His friends, his family, none of it mattered. What mattered was Max, the one true friend who had stood beside him through it all. As Ryan sat in his prison cell staring at the cold walls that now defined his existence, he clung to the memories of his time with Max. Those memories became his lifeline, the only thing that kept him from losing his grip entirely. He would close his eyes and imagine Max's wagging tail, his gentle eyes, and the way the dog had always known exactly what Ryan needed. Whether it was a comforting nudge or a moment of silent understanding, Max had always been there. But now, Ryan had nothing left. His innocence was lost in a sea of legal battles, and all he could do was wait. Wait for justice that seemed like it would never come. The days turned to weeks, weeks to months. Yet, in all that time, one thing never wavered: Ryan's burning desire to see Max again. Ryan's final wish was simple: to say goodbye to his best friend. But could he ever get that chance? With each passing day, that hope grew smaller. The walls of his prison tightened, but his love for Max remained as strong as ever. His life, his future, none of it mattered if he couldn't have that one last moment with the dog who had been his lifeline. As the months dragged on in prison, Ryan's health began to deteriorate. His once strong frame, honed by years of military training, was slowly succumbing to the weight of the unjust life he now led. The stress, the anxiety, and the isolation were eating away at him. His mind remained sharp, but his body began to fail him. He'd often wake up in the middle of the night, soaked in sweat, unable to breathe properly. His doctors told him his physical condition was worsening by the day, but it wasn't just his body that was breaking. His spirit was too. Ryan had been through worse before. War, trauma, the loss of comrades. Nothing could compare to the crushing reality of being locked in a cell, knowing he was innocent but powerless to prove it. What hurt him the most wasn't just the years stolen from his life, but the loss of Max. Every time he closed his eyes, he would imagine his service dog, tail wagging, walking by his side. He missed Max more than words could say. Max wasn't just a dog. He was a symbol of the life Ryan had lost, the loyalty and the companionship that had once given him purpose. With his health declining and his days in prison feeling numbered, Ryan made one simple, desperate request: to see Max one last time. The guards had seen him broken before, but this request was different. It wasn't a plea for a reduced sentence or a last-minute pardon. It was just the desire to say goodbye to the one thing that had kept him alive for so long. Max had been his partner, his closest friend, and the thought of never seeing him again was almost more than Ryan could bear. Ryan's family rallied around him, desperate to make his last wish a reality. His sister, Emily, took the lead, calling anyone who would listen: lawyers, local politicians, even veterans organizations that could help. She wrote letters, made calls, and fought with everything she had to convince the prison system to allow Ryan one final moment with Max. She explained that it wasn't just for Ryan's emotional well-being. It was the last chance for him to find closure in a life that had been stolen from him. But every time Emily reached out, she was met with resistance. Prison rules were clear: no animals in the facility, especially not a dog. She even reached out to the head of the prison administration, who was unmoved by her plea. To them, Max was just a mere dog, a piece of property, and allowing an inmate to reunite with his pet violated prison policy. Emily tried to explain that this wasn't just about a dog. It was about a man who had served his country, been wrongfully convicted, and had already lost so much. But the prison system was unmoved by her arguments. They weren't interested in bending the rules for a dying man's last wish. Ryan's family wasn't ready to give up, though. Emily knew this wasn't just a matter of a pet reunion. It was about something much deeper. It was about Ryan finding peace, about healing the wounds that had been inflicted on him by a broken system. Emily and Ryan's parents started organizing petitions, collecting signatures from fellow veterans, former service members, and even prison employees who understood the deep bond between a soldier and his service dog. They argued that Max wasn't just an animal. He was Ryan's companion, the one who had been there through thick and thin, saving his life time and again. But as the days passed, the prison system held firm. Their refusal felt like a final betrayal. Every time Ryan was told no, it chipped away at him even more. His health grew worse, and the hope of seeing Max again seemed like a distant dream. He spent his days staring at the walls of his cell, thinking of the moments he had shared with Max, the walks in the park, the quiet evenings, and the way Max had always known when to comfort him, when to be still, and when to offer companionship without a word. Ryan's family continued their fight, but the walls of bureaucracy were high. Time was slipping away, and the emotional toll on Ryan was unbearable. His hope was fading, and as the days turned into weeks, the possibility of seeing Max once more seemed to be slipping beyond reach. Would Ryan's final wish be crushed by the unyielding rules of the prison system, or would fate intervene? Emily sat at her kitchen table staring at the stack of paperwork in front of her. The phone had become her constant companion, ringing incessantly with calls from lawyers, veterans organizations, and even former prison officials who had heard about Ryan's case. Each call ended with the same response: no. No exceptions would be made. Max was a dog, and prison rules were clear. She hung up the phone with a sense of hopelessness settling over her chest. But that hopelessness didn't last long. Emily was determined, more determined than ever. She knew she couldn't give up. Not now, not when Ryan's request was so simple, so human. Emily wasn't the only one feeling the weight of this fight. Ryan's parents, Carol and Tom, had been working tirelessly to help. Carol had reached out to the local news, hoping they could bring attention to Ryan's situation and sway public opinion. The media didn't seem to care. There were too many other stories to cover, too many other injustices to fight. Ryan's wrongful conviction was one thing, but the story of a soldier wanting to see his service dog one last time. It seemed trivial to them, a fleeting moment in an overwhelming sea of problems. Yet, for Ryan's family, it was everything. Each day that passed brought more desperation. Ryan's health continued to deteriorate. The prison system had denied every single request to allow Max in, but Ryan wouldn't stop asking. Each time he asked, it was as though he was holding on to the very last thread of hope. When Emily visited him, his eyes were a mixture of sadness and determination, but he didn't show her the full extent of his pain. He didn't want to burden her. He kept his head high, even though he was growing weaker by the day. The lines in his face were more pronounced now. His once muscular frame had withered, and his energy seemed to fade faster with each passing day. Yet, in his heart, there was one burning desire: to see Max. Max had been more than just a dog to Ryan. He was his savior. Max had entered Ryan's life shortly after he was deployed overseas. Ryan had been through hell during his first tour, witnessing the horrors of war, struggling with PTSD before it even had a name. Max was supposed to be his working dog, but what began as a professional relationship soon blossomed into a friendship. Max didn't just follow orders, he understood Ryan's moods, his thoughts. In the heat of battle, when Ryan had to push through his fear, it was Max who guided him, keeping him grounded. On days when the darkness of war threatened to overtake him, Max was the one who would nudge his hand, offering comfort, offering loyalty. Ryan couldn't remember how many times he had whispered to Max, "I don't know how to keep going without you." But every time, Max had been there, standing strong, unwavering in his loyalty. Ryan had told himself, time and time again, that Max was the one reason he hadn't completely lost his way. He wasn't just a service dog. Max was his reason to keep breathing, to keep fighting. He was the dog who saw the man behind the uniform, the man who needed a friend. As the weeks passed, Ryan's hope began to wane. He couldn't help but wonder if this was a cruel test, one last bit of suffering before the end. He reflected on the injustice of it all, the crime he didn't commit, the years of his life stolen away, the moments he would never get back. But the thought of seeing Max again, just once more, kept him going. He clung to that hope, even when everything around him seemed to fall apart. "Please, Emily, you have to keep trying," Ryan would whisper each time she visited. "I just need to see him. I can't die without seeing him one last time." His voice cracked each time, a mixture of pain and desperation, and Emily couldn't help but fight back tears. Every conversation with Ryan felt like it was slowly draining her. She knew the clock was ticking, and with every phone call and rejection, she felt herself losing the battle. But she wasn't about to let her brother lose without a fight. The family explored every possible avenue to get Max to the prison. They reached out to legal experts who had fought similar cases before, hoping there might be a loophole in the prison's policies. But each time, they were told that nothing could be done. Max wasn't a human, and the prison's rules didn't allow for exceptions. It wasn't just a matter of legality either, it was a matter of bureaucracy. Prison systems were rigid, and breaking a rule for an inmate's final request was seen as a dangerous precedent. One afternoon, Emily sat across from a retired prison official who had once worked closely with the prison system. He looked at her, a sympathetic expression on his face. "You're up against a brick wall, Emily. The system doesn't bend for anyone, not even for a soldier who served his country. You know that, don't you?" His words struck her like a punch to the gut. She wanted to scream, to tell him that he was wrong, that Ryan deserved this one moment. But the cold truth hung in the air between them, and she couldn't deny it. She didn't want to give up, but as the days grew longer, she felt the weight of the situation closing in on her. That night, Emily went to the prison to visit Ryan. He was lying in his cot, his face pale and drawn, eyes distant, When she walked in, he looked at her with a quiet smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Any luck?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Emily sat down beside him, taking his hand in hers. She forced a smile, but inside, her heart was heavy. "No, Ryan. They're not budging," she said softly, "but I won't stop trying. I promise you that." Ryan's eyes closed for a moment, and a single tear slid down his cheek. He wasn't sure how much longer he could hold on, but as he drifted off to sleep, he clung to one thought. Maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way. It had been a long and emotionally exhausting battle. Ryan's health was deteriorating fast, and the days he had left were numbered. His body, weakened by illness and the relentless weight of the wrongful conviction, was slowly fading. The prison walls had begun to feel like the confines of a tomb. But through all the pain, through all the frustrations, there had been one thing keeping him from losing all hope: the image of Max, the dog that had been his protector, his companion, and his source of strength for so many years. And now, at the end of it all, Ryan had one simple wish, one final request: to see Max, to say goodbye. Emily had been relentless. She fought, she cried, she pleaded, and she exhausted every possible avenue. But it was all beginning to feel futile. No matter how many letters, calls, or meetings with the prison administration they had, the answer was always the same: no exceptions. Max wasn't human. The rules were clear. The bureaucratic wall felt insurmountable. But then, one day, Emily received an unexpected call. "Emily," the voice on the other end of the line said, "we've reviewed your request one more time. After much discussion and under very special circumstances, we've made an exception. Ryan will be allowed to see his dog." She couldn't breathe for a moment. It was too unbelievable. She had heard this before. Too many empty promises, too many rejections. But this time was different. The prison had granted the request. Max could visit Ryan. It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. Without wasting a second, Emily rushed to the prison, the weight of the news pressing down on her chest. She wasn't sure if she could truly believe it until she saw it happen. She quickly arranged the details, the logistics, the paperwork. It had to be done right, and everything had to fall into place. After weeks of trying, she had finally succeeded. Meanwhile, in his prison cell, Ryan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind consumed with thoughts of Max. He had stopped asking, stopped hoping, stopped believing it would happen. The harsh reality of his wrongful conviction had worn him down so much that even the thought of seeing Max again seemed impossible. Yet, as Emily entered the cell block with the news, his heart skipped a beat. "Ryan," Emily said, her voice trembling with excitement and disbelief, "I have incredible news. They've approved it. Max can come to see you." Ryan's eyes widened. It was as if time had stopped. He sat up slowly, as though not fully able to process the words. His throat tightened and he blinked back tears. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm serious. You'll see him, Ryan. You'll see your best friend again." He couldn't contain it any longer. Tears streamed down his face as Emily hugged him tightly. For the first time in weeks, he felt a rush of hope. The dog that had been his constant companion, the one who had never failed him, would be there. He could say goodbye. He could see Max again. The waiting was unbearable. Ryan's body ached with the anticipation, but the minutes felt like hours. And then, finally, the sound of the door opening. Max stepped into the room. Ryan couldn't move. His heart raced as he looked at his best friend, the dog who had saved him, comforted him, and stood by his side through it all. Max's eyes locked onto Ryan, and for a brief moment, it felt as though time had stopped. Then, in an instant, Max rushed to Ryan's side, his tail wagging furiously, his body trembling with excitement. He leaped onto the bed, nuzzling Ryan's face with such force that it almost knocked him back. Max's joyful bark filled the room, echoing off the walls, but it was not the sound of a dog happy to see his owner. It was the sound of two souls reconnecting. Ryan's hands shook as he reached out, his fingers brushing through Max's fur. He pulled the dog close, holding him tightly as if never wanting to let go. Max's warmth, his familiar scent, and the soft feel of his fur were more than Ryan had hoped for. In that moment, the prison walls seemed to fade away. It was just him and Max, the bond they had shared for years, the connection they had forged in battle, in hardship, and in love. Max licked Ryan's face, comforting him, sensing the pain that Ryan had been through. Ryan's heart swelled with emotion. He looked down at Max, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I never thought I'd see you again, buddy. You were everything to me. You were the reason I kept going. I don't know how I could have made it without you." Max, ever the loyal companion, simply sat beside him, looking up at Ryan with unwavering love and understanding. There were no words needed. The two of them shared a moment of pure connection, a moment where nothing else mattered. Ryan's tears fell freely now, not just out of sorrow but out of gratitude. He had one last chance to say goodbye, one last chance to feel Max's presence. Emily stood in the doorway, watching with tears in her eyes as the reunion unfolded. She had been fighting for this moment, for Ryan's final wish to be granted, but she hadn't expected the emotional force of it. She watched as Ryan whispered his goodbyes to Max, his fingers trembling as he stroked the dog's fur. She knew that, in that moment, Ryan had found peace. No matter what happened next, this moment, this reunion, would be the last gift she could give her brother, a moment of healing and closure. Ryan held Max for what felt like hours. He had said everything he needed to say, and yet, as the reunion came to an end, he realized that his heart was at peace. The emotional weight that had been holding him down, the pain of his wrongful conviction, and the loneliness of prison, all of it was lifted, even if just for a moment. He was no longer alone. He had his best friend with him again, and that was enough. As the guards came to escort Max out of the room, Ryan pressed his forehead against the dog's fur one last time. "Thank you, Max," he whispered. "Thank you for everything." And with that, Max was gently led out of the room, leaving Ryan to face whatever came next. But for that one final moment, he was at peace. Ryan's final moments passed with an unexpected peace that he hadn't felt in years. The reunion with Max had given him the closure he so desperately needed. As the days wore on, his condition worsened. But there was no fear in his eyes, no regret. The pain of the wrongful conviction, the suffering of his years behind bars, those things had faded in the wake of his last wish being fulfilled. He had seen Max again, the one constant in his life, the dog who had kept him going when nothing else could. And that was enough. Emily and their parents stayed close, never leaving his side in his final days. They had watched as Ryan and Max shared their last moments together, and they knew that there was no way to measure the emotional weight of what had transpired. For Ryan, Max's presence had been a lifeline. For his family, witnessing that reunion had been the final act of love they could give him. It was the moment that allowed them to let go, knowing that Ryan had found peace. Ryan's passing was quiet, a slow release from the world that had held him captive for far too long. He didn't fight it. Instead, as he drifted away, his last thoughts were of Max. In his final moments, he had known that he wasn't alone, that Max had been with him until the end. Emily held his hand, her tears falling silently as she whispered her goodbyes, knowing that Ryan had found the peace he'd been denied for so long. The emotional impact on his family was profound. They had watched Ryan suffer through years of wrongful imprisonment, but the chance to give him that one last moment of comfort made all the difference. They knew that his final wish had been granted, that his last moments had been filled with love, loyalty, and peace. It wasn't the happy ending they had hoped for when Ryan first entered the prison system, but it was a resolution that allowed them to begin healing. The image of Ryan holding Max one last time would stay with them forever, a symbol of unshakable loyalty, both human and canine. As the family made arrangements for Ryan's funeral, they spoke about the incredible bond he had shared with Max. It wasn't just a relationship between a soldier and his dog, it was a deep connection, one that transcended the boundaries of war, law, and even time. Ryan's legacy wasn't just in his service to his country or the sacrifices he'd made. It was in the love he had for Max, a love that had never wavered, not even in the darkest moments of his life. Max, too, would carry on. The dog who had been with Ryan through thick and thin had outlived his partner, but the bond they shared would live on in the memories of those who had witnessed their connection. Max's loyalty to Ryan would be remembered by his family, by everyone who knew their story. The dog had given Ryan something that no one else could, a final moment of peace, a final sense of home. As Ryan was laid to rest, his family found solace in knowing that, despite everything, Ryan had been able to say goodbye to the one thing that had made his life bearable, the dog who had always been by his side. The story of Ryan and Max, the bond between them, was one that would endure, long after Ryan's passing. It was a legacy of love, loyalty, and the power of a simple wish, fulfilled in the final moments of a man's life. If Ryan and Max's story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe for more emotional, real-life stories. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know how this bond of loyalty and love impacted you. And if you want to hear more powerful stories like this one, make sure to watch our next video.